This is the story of how scientists proved that Jack and the Beanstalk is 5,000 years old. In 2016, 2 researchers used DNA-like analysis to trace the tale back to the Bronze Age, revealing that the bedtime story you know actually began with nomadic horse riders on the steppes of Ukraine and Russia. Folklorists assumed for generations that fairy tales were relatively recent inventions, maybe a few hundred years old at most. The oldest written version of Jack and the Beanstalk appeared in 1734, and before that nothing existed in the historical record. But on January 20th, 2016, Dr. Sara Graça da Silva from the New University of Lisbon and Dr. Jamshid Tehrani from Durham University published research that changed everything we thought we knew about where our stories come from. Their findings were startling. Jack and the Beanstalk wasn't a few hundred years old, but 5,000 years old, which meant the story predated ancient Greece and the pyramids of Egypt. The tale came from a time before writing even existed in most of the world. But here's the thing. How do you prove a story is 5,000 years old when there's no written record? How do you trace an oral tale back through millennia? The answer lies in a surprising place. The same methods biologists use to trace human ancestry through DNA. Dr. Da Silva and Dr. Tehrani analysed 275 fairy tales from something called the Arne Thompson Uther Index, which is essentially a massive catalogue of folktale types used by folklore scholars worldwide. Finnish folklorist Antti Arne created the original index in 1910. Then American folklorist Stith Thompson expanded it in 1928 and 1961, and German folklorist Hans-Jörg Uther revised it further in 2004. Researchers use the index to identify the underlying structure of tales and compare them across cultures. Jack and the Beanstalk falls into the classification ATU 320C, which scholars call the boy who stole ogre's treasure. This classification doesn't just include the English version with the Beanstalk, but encompasses similar stories from Italy, Russia, Hungary, Greece, France, Japan, Indonesia, Mongolia, Ethiopia, Chile, and dozens of other places. The specific details change from culture to culture. Sometimes it's a beanstalk, sometimes a ladder, sometimes a rope. But the core structure remains remarkably consistent across all of them. A young protagonist, often poor and underestimated, ascends to a dangerous realm where a supernatural being guards treasures, steals magical objects, gets chased, and escapes using wit rather than strength. What Da Silva and Tehrani did was apply phylogenetic analysis to these tales, the same method biologists use to construct family trees, showing how species evolved from common ancestors. Instead of analysing genetic mutations, the researchers analysed story elements like plot points, character types, magical objects, and resolutions. They traced these elements backward through time, following the branches of the Indo-European language family tree. And that's the key insight here. Language and stories travel together, which means when populations split and migrate, they carry their languages and their tales with them. Over time, languages evolve in different directions, so the word for father becomes pater in Latin, Peter in Sanskrit, father in English, vater in German, but they all stem from the same Proto-Indo-European root. The same principle applies to stories. Out of the 275 tales they analysed, 76 were found to have been transmitted vertically, passed down from parents to children like genes rather than horizontally through cultural mixing and borrowing. More than 1/4 of these tales had ancient roots, and several could be traced back thousands of years. Jack and the Beanstalk was one of them. The researchers dated it to approximately 5,000 years ago, somewhere between 4,500 and 2,500 BC. which places its origin at the split between Eastern and Western Indo-European languages, right when Proto-Indo-European was still spoken as a living language. To understand what this means, we need to talk about who the Proto-Indo-European people actually were, because this is where the story becomes even more remarkable. The Proto-Indo-Europeans lived on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, a vast grassland stretching from northeastern Bulgaria and southeastern Romania through Moldova, across southern and eastern Ukraine, into the northern Caucasus of southern Russia, and reaching the lower Volga region of western Kazakhstan. Picture a map, and you'll see it's essentially the land bridge between Europe and Asia, north of the Black Sea and Caspian Sea. These weren't farmers tilling fields, but nomadic pastoralists, herders who moved with their animals. They had two revolutionary technologies that changed human history. They domesticated horses, and they invented wheeled vehicles. Suddenly, populations that had been relatively isolated could move vast distances. And as anthropologist David Anthony put it, the domestication of the horse created a steppe bridge connecting Europe and Asia. Around 4,500 years ago, roughly 2500 BC, something extraordinary happened. The Yamnaya people, who spoke Proto-Indo-European, began one of the largest migrations in human prehistory, moving westward into Eastern and Central Europe and creating what archaeologists call the corded ware culture. They reached Scandinavia and the British Isles, moved eastward to the Altai Mountains of Siberia, and pushed through the Caucasus into Anatolia, Iran, and India. Modern genetic research has confirmed the scale of this migration. Ancient DNA studies from 2015 onward show that modern Europeans can trace significant ancestry back to these steppe populations. And the corded ware people, for instance, could trace about 75% of their ancestry to the Yamnaya. And when these populations moved, they carried their stories with them. Think about what this means for Jack and the Beanstalk. The tale emerged in a world of horse-riding nomads in the late Neolithic or early Bronze Age, when there were no written records, because writing wouldn't be invented in most regions for centuries or millennia. Everything was transmitted orally, memorized and retold around fires, generation after generation. The story survived the migration across Europe, survived the development of agriculture, survived the rise and fall of empires, survived the coming of Christianity, the Black Death, the Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution. For 5,000 years, parents told this story to children who grew up and told it to their children, who told it to theirs. The details shifted as the giant's name changed and the treasures varied and moral lessons were added or removed, but the core remained the same. Boy climbs to sky realm, boy steals from ogre, boy escapes, giant dies. Dr. Tehrani offered an explanation for why certain stories endure when others fade away. He said that a key ingredient in the success of fairy tales is the juxtaposition of the ordinary and the extraordinary, putting humble farm boys and servant girls in the company of giants and fairy godmothers. These stories speak to enduring human concerns like family relationships, obligations, conflict, betrayal, survival, violence, and love. The tale of the boy who steals from the ogre addresses something fundamental about the human experience. It's a story about the underdog, about cleverness triumphing over brute strength, about the redistribution of power and wealth. These themes resonated with Bronze Age herders on the steppe, and they still resonate today. Jack and the Beanstalk wasn't the only ancient tale they discovered. The Smith and the Devil, a story about a blacksmith who sells his soul to the devil for supernatural metalworking powers, dated back 5,000 to 6,000 years and was possibly even older than Jack and the Beanstalk. Beauty and the Beast and Rumpelstiltskin both dated back between 2,500 and 60,000 years, which meant these tales existed significantly earlier than their first appearances in Greek and Roman mythology. The research vindicated a theory that had been dismissed for over a century. In the 1800s, Wilhelm Grimm, one half of the Brothers Grimm, believed that fairy tales were thousands of years old and shared across Indo-European cultures. His contemporaries thought this was romantic nonsense and believed surely stories couldn't survive that long through oral transmission alone. Surely they were more recent inventions. Wilhelm Grimm was right. The stories were ancient. The first printed version of Jack and the Beanstalk appeared in 1734, published by J. Roberts in London under the title The Story of Jack Spriggins and the Enchanted Bean. It appeared in a book called Round About Our Coal Fire, and in this version, the giant had a name, Gogmagog. But here's the thing, evidence suggests the story existed in some form much earlier. Around 1596, Thomas Nasher wrote that Fee fi fo fum, I smell the blood of an Englishman, was an obscure old poem of unknown origins, already ancient in his time. About a decade later, around 1606, William Shakespeare used a similar phrase in King Lear. Fee fo and fum, I smell the blood of a British man. Some scholars theorise the phrase may have been a Celtic chant disparaging English invaders, and the words themselves might derive from ancient Gaelic, fiad, fiú, foch, feum, meaning food, good to eat, sufficient for my hunger. In 1807, Benjamin Tabart published The History of Jack and the Beanstalk and made a change that transformed everything. He moralised the story by adding a fairy character who tells Jack that the giant murdered his father and stole his family's wealth. Suddenly, Jack wasn't just a burglar, but a hero seeking righteous revenge, reclaiming his birthright. The theft became justified restitution. This transformation reflects something about how stories adapt to their cultural moment. The original oral versions presented Jack's actions more ambiguously, because he was essentially committing burglary and the giant's death was grim and brutal. But Victorian England wanted clear moral lessons in children's stories, so Tabart gave them one. In 1890, Joseph Jacobs published the version most commonly reprinted today in his collection English Fairy Tales. Jacobs preferred versions closer to the original oral tellings without heavy-handed moralising, and his version is the one most folklorists and writers prefer, J.R.R. Tolkien among them. In Jacobs' telling, Jack is poor, makes a foolish trade, discovers the beanstalk, and takes what he wants from the giant. There's no backstory about murdered fathers or stolen inheritance, but just a tale about survival, cleverness, and the audacity of taking from those who have more than you. The story's moral ambiguity has troubled some modern audiences. Film director Brian Henson's 2001 miniseries, Jack and the Beanstalk, The Real Story, actually vilified Jack, reflecting what Henson described as his father, Jim Henson's disgust at Jack's unscrupulous actions. Other adaptations, like the 1952 Abbott and Costello version, blamed the giant for the family's poverty and made the hen originally belong to Jack's family, once again justifying the theft. The 2014 film Into the Woods took a different approach, continuing past the happily ever after to show the giant's widow seeking revenge for her husband's murder. It's a reminder that giants, despite being monsters in the story's logic, might have legitimate grievances. These modern reinterpretations reveal our discomfort with a hero who simply steals and kills. We want justification. We want the giant to have deserved it somehow. But the original tale, the 5,000-year-old tale, may not have cared about such moral niceties. It was a story about survival in a harsh world where you took what you could get. The research by De Silva and Terrani has broader implications beyond just dating old stories. As Dr. Terrani noted, The kinds of stories told in ancestral societies can provide insights into their culture, furnishing new perspectives on linguistic, genetic, and archaeological reconstructions of human prehistory. Consider what the existence of the smith and the devil at 5,000 to 6,000 years old tells us. The tale revolves around metalworking, which suggests that blacksmithing held significant cultural importance, perhaps even spiritual or supernatural significance in Bronze Age society. The smith's ability to transform raw ore into tools and weapons would have seemed almost magical. Jack and the Beanstalk contains its own cultural clues. The vertical journey, climbing from Earth to a realm in the sky, appears in cultures worldwide. Jacob's ladder in the Hebrew Bible, the Tower of Babel, Yggdrasil in Norse mythology. The image of a cosmic connection between earth and heaven seems to be a fundamental human archetype, and the fact that this motif appears in a tale from the Bronze Age suggests these vertical cosmologies have ancient roots. The treasures Jack steals are revealing too. Gold represents a measure of wealth and power. A hen that lays golden eggs represents a renewable source of wealth, and a golden harp that plays itself represents beauty and art made permanent and self-sustaining. These aren't just random magical objects, but fundamental human desires: security, abundance, beauty. Not everyone accepted Da Silva and Tehrani's findings without question. Some folklorists raised concerns about the dating of the smith and the devil to the Bronze Age, and the issue was straightforward. Did the word for metalsmith even exist 5,000 to 6,000 years ago? Could a story about a blacksmith predate the vocabulary necessary to tell it? The researchers maintained their evidence was strong. Phylogenetic analysis, when applied carefully, can distinguish between tales that were truly passed down through generations and tales that spread through later cultural contact. The convergence of linguistic evidence, genetic evidence from ancient DNA, and archaeological evidence all supported their conclusions. The steppe hypothesis for Indo-European origins has grown increasingly solid over the past decade. Ancient DNA research from 2015 onward dramatically confirmed the migration patterns, and even Colin Renfrew, who originally proposed a competing Anatolian hypothesis for Indo-European origins, has acknowledged the reality of the steppe migrations. Still, uncertainty remains. Proto-Indo-European left no written records, and the language has been reconstructed through comparative linguistics, analysing similarities and differences among its daughter languages to infer what the parent language must have looked like. The same applies to the stories because we can trace patterns and commonalities, but we're working with inference and probability, not certainty. Dr. Tehrani himself noted that while stories are frequently updated to suit different times and places, many elements, both magical and mundane, can survive for generations. The key word there is can, because not all elements survive, and some stories transform beyond recognition. Others disappear entirely. The tales that made it through 5,000 years are the survivors, the ones that proved most adaptable and most resonant across cultures and centuries. So what do we make of all this? What does it mean that Jack and the Beanstalk is 5,000 years old? First, it means that oral tradition is far more stable and reliable than we gave it credit for. For decades, scholars assumed oral transmission was inherently unreliable, that stories would inevitably mutate and drift until they bore no resemblance to their origins. The research proves otherwise, because with proper conditions like strong cultural transmission, memorable story structures, and fundamental human themes, oral tales can maintain their core identity across millennia. Second, it connects us to our ancestors in a surprisingly direct way. When you tell your child the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, you're participating in an unbroken chain of transmission that stretches back 50 centuries. You're speaking words that nomadic herders on the Pontic-Caspian steppe spoke around their fires, and the details have changed like the names, the specific treasures, the moral framing. But the story's bones are the same bones. Third, it reveals something about what makes a story last. Dr. Tehrani's observation bears repeating. These tales speak to enduring human concerns. Jack and the Beanstalk isn't 5,000 years old because it's about a magical beanstalk, but because it's about being poor and desperate, about taking risks, about confronting power that seems invincible, about using cleverness to survive against impossible odds. Those concerns didn't disappear when we stopped being nomadic herders, because they're still with us. The story has survived the transition from nomadism to agriculture, from oral culture to written culture, from Bronze Age to Iron Age, to Classical Age, to Medieval Age, to Renaissance, to Enlightenment, to Industrial Age, to Information Age. It survived because each generation found something in it worth keeping, worth passing on, and that's the real secret behind Jack and the Beanstalk. The 5,000-year-old secret isn't just about dating or linguistic trees or phylogenetic analysis, but about recognizing that the stories we tell our children, the ones we dismiss as simple fairy tales, carry within them the accumulated wisdom, fears, hopes and dreams of hundreds of generations. They're not just entertainment, but inheritance. When Da Silva and Tehrani published their research in January 2016, they gave us proof of something we might have suspected, but couldn't confirm. That humanity's stories connect us across vast stretches of time. The boy who climbed the beanstalk 5,000 years ago is the same boy who climbs it today. The giant he faces is the same giant, and the courage it takes to steal fire from the gods, to challenge power, to bet everything on magic beans. That courage is the same courage. Jack and the Beanstalk has survived because we need it to survive. We need stories about underdogs who win. We need stories about the impossible becoming possible. We need stories that remind us that the world is stranger and more magical than it appears, that ordinary people can do extraordinary things, that giants can fall. 5,000 years from now, if humanity still exists, someone will be telling this story. The details will have changed again, and maybe Jack will be climbing a light beam instead of a beanstalk. Maybe the giant will be an artificial intelligence or an alien, but the core will remain, because the core is about us, about who we are, what we fear, what we hope for, and how we find the courage to climb toward the sky, even when we know there's a giant waiting at the top. That's the 5,000-year-old secret behind Jack and the Beanstalk. It's not really about Jack at all, but about every one of us who's ever felt small, ever faced something bigger than ourselves, ever had to climb into the unknown with nothing but our wits and our nerve. And that story apparently never gets old.